Hey, hello everybody. This is Healy Jones from Kruze Consulting. I'm joined by Hayek Camps, and this is the beginning of the meat of our venture capital pitch deck course. This is a free course that we're offering to help you get up to speed on how to build a pitch deck for your startup. We are starting at the beginning here with the very first slide. Before we dive in too much, just a reminder, this will be available at kruzeconsulting.com/pitch-deck. Kruze Consulting is one of the leading providers of finance and accounting consulting services to venture capital-backed startups. Our clients raise over $1 billion a year. I run the FP&A team. I help our clients prepare for their fundraisers, in particular, making sure their numbers tell the story well. Part of telling the story, however, is a pitch deck. And as a former venture capitalist and then operating executive who helped raise quite a bit of venture capital funding, I've got some strong opinions on what works in a deck and what can be successful. And I advise a lot of clients around that. My clients have raised hundreds of millions of dollars recently, obviously not completely based on my advice, but I do like to think that I've been helpful. Hai is joining me because he is one of the leading pitch deck consultants in the United States. He's here in Silicon Valley. He's written the book Pitch Perfect, which, if it will focus on it, which it probably won't, is the book you can go get on Amazon on how to raise or build your pitch deck. He's also a reporter with TechCrunch, has been an executive at startups and successfully raised quite a bit of money, and also has been a venture capitalist at a pretty well-known accelerator. So Haya, thanks for joining me and thanks for joining us with us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So let's level set here. We're about to talk about the first slide of the pitch deck. Sometimes people incorrectly think this is a throwaway slide, but it actually can help quite a bit. What is this slide for? The very first slide, like the cover slide of your deck.
Yeah, well, in the olden days, when you still did meetings in person, and hopefully that'll start happening again, this is the slide that you typically throw up on the projector or on the screen just to make sure that everything is set up correctly. So it's actually up for quite a while the associates and partners find their way into the room, everybody kind of gets their cups of teas or whatever happens. So there's typically a couple of minutes worth of downtime and small talk. You will bet that people are going to be looking at this slide for quite a long time. Same as the last slide, actually. So not using it for what it's worth is a pretty silly idea. This is your chance to really kind of set the theme for, hey, this is what we're about to talk about.
I totally agree with you. And so this slide has, other than putting your name and perhaps your logo up there, I think this, if you are doing something that is understandable, this slide should help the venture capitalist immediately understand what you're doing, or at least get some context around the industry.
Yep.
And I think the thing that is kind of cliched these days, but I am Uber for X, or I Airbnb for Y, or I'm Salesforce for this. Like those types of analogies actually do really help ground everyone to understand a little bit more about what you're doing.
And in an ideal world, this slide should actually be enough for some VCs to not take the meeting in the first place, right? They pull up your slide deck, they pull up slide one, and they see, oh, they're a B2B company, we don't invest in those. Don't waste anybody's time. A fast no is the second best answer you will possibly get from the VC.
Sure.
So let's get there as fast as we possibly can. Let's not waste anybody's time.
Exactly. Totally. And just to kind of demonstrate, we have some example pitch decks. I just want to quickly pull up Uber, because everyone says, oh, my startup is Uber for this or Uber for that. Here's what Uber did for their
Did they just say we're Uber for Uber? Because that would be hilarious.
No, that would be great. They're like, we're Uber for, wait, you don't even know what that is. No, it's next generation car service. So they did start off more as a car service. If any of you have worked in the East Coast, particularly the Northeast, like New York or Boston.
Can we just celebrate those retro phones? I love it.
I know, they're pretty sweet, actually. I like the BlackBerry, which again ties to the fact that this is like a black car, which is a pretty common thing back in the day for finance. So so even when you're doing something that's kind of newish, like Uber was doing when they were raising funding, you can hopefully explain pretty quickly what you do. Now, there is another thing that I like to do on this, which is highlight how much money you're raising.
Yeah. So
I love it if I'm Uber for X and I'm raising a $10 million Series A.
So I'm sitting here grinning now because you haven't actually seen the redesigned slide one for 4P yet. I think you should pull that up because.
All right, great. So we have
this morning. Yeah, go on.
We have example slide decks available. Again, kruzeconsulting.com/pitch-deck. They are Google Slides. You are free to copy them, download them, use them. They're templates. We're trying to help you get to the starting line a little faster with your pitch deck. And so I'm going to share the one that Hai is excited to talk about. All right, so 4 Ps. Let's take a quick look at this slide and figure out if we can understand what this company does. Yeah. So
So the idea here is basically this lives up on the screen while you are kind of getting settled in. Now, there's a little bit too much text here. I don't like the design of it, but then, I'm not a designer. But what you get here is you get the name of the company, Perfect Plumbing Partner Platform, 4P, hilarious pun because, I kind of have to. But some of the things we talked about here, less admin, more plumbing. It's kind of their strap line. It explains what the company does. Salesforce for plumbing, right? We're going right to the heart of it. People know what Salesforce is. It's a customer relationship management tool. It's a sales tool. This thing is both, and this is specific for plumbing. And then immediately we go into, we're raising $8 million to disrupt a $128 billion industry with a B2B SaaS platform for sole traders and SMEs. There's so much information on this slide that a VC can take and go, oh, yeah, I know what this is. Super helpful.
So yeah, a design is a little busy. I've definitely seen people pull this off a little more cleanly. It is possible that you could get by without the less admin, more plumbing, and just go with Salesforce for plumbing. There's a few different ways you could play this. You might want to say that it's $8 million Series A, but then we're putting more text on here. But the point is, on the very first slide, the very first moment that the VC opens up this deck, or that when it's on the screen in the conference room, to the extent that people ever meet again in person, when the investors walk in, they'll immediately know what you do, right? So,
yep. And I think including round size, as you were just saying, Healy, including a round size is so helpful because it helps level set. The VC will go, okay, if we want to lead this round, we probably put up half. Do we want to put $4 million into this company? And they immediately start thinking, who else can we rally to try and help fill out this round, right? They immediately jump to that, and it's what they do for a living. So
that helps just to take a tiny tangent into the way the venture capitalists think. When they invest in your business, they have a certain size fund and they have a certain portfolio construction strategy. They're trying to have a certain number of investments out of their portfolio. So
out of their fund,
right? Exactly. So they're trying to construct this portfolio based on certain amounts of ownership that they want to have in the investments. And they also have to remember that your company is likely to raise a lot of money over time. So they want to make sure they reserve enough capital to continue to support your business if you are successful, right? So they might support you in the A, the B, the C, all the way through. That is what they're doing. So by telling them how much money you're raising, you can help them figure out this. Oh, this is the right size round for me. Right. And if they couple that with the industry you're in, like, so let's say you're a biotech company and you're raising an $8 million Series A, well, the biotech investor will know that you need $100 million to get where you're going, and they have the right size fund to support you through all the rounds that you're going to need should you be successful. That's like a really important nuance there. And the other thing is, again, the slide we just showed doesn't say it, but some investors are very particular about wanting to do seeds or A's or B's. They have this like swim lane that they've told their investors they'll play in. And so you can just help make it super clear, hey, we're this type of company raising this much money, and it's a Series A. Then it's like they can check all those boxes and say, this is a meeting I want to take. I kind of have a feeling for what you do. I'm excited to learn about the nuances because it fits in my bucket. It's the right amount of money. It's the right stage. Let's go.
Yeah, totally. And just to kind of riff on that a tiny little bit more, the VC's investors, so the LPs or limited partners, they're typically sent like a quick blurb on what this company is and why you invested. It's super helpful if this first slide basically does most of the heavy lifting for you. And if this general partner at this firm goes, oh yeah, no, this will be super easy to explain to the LPs, you've done part of their work for them. Super helpful.
Yep, exactly. So again, what's this slide for? You're setting the table, making sure everybody knows they're in the right room, that this is a conversation they want to have, that it's not a waste of anybody's time.
Yeah,
it's exactly what it's for. And so I think that the flip side of this is that it's not unusual for me to see a deck and to not know what the company does for several slides.
Yeah.
In fact, I was joking with Scott Orn, who used to be a venture investor who works with me at Kruze. He's gotten through entire presentations and not really know what the company does. And that's kind of a problem. So don't be that.
Right. Well, and actually, I mean, if you make it to the end, then you still don't know. Clearly, somebody should have at some point told this founder that they're barking up the wrong tree. But even 4 or 5 slides, I mean, people's attention spans are really, really short. A good professional VC will sit through the entire presentation. But remember, they've already seen 3 pitches that day. They're thinking about the board meeting they have in the afternoon. Minds wander. It is what humans do. So if you manage to get your claws into somebody early on and say, hey, you've got to lean in and pay attention, put your phone away, put your computer away, right? You don't get to say that, but that's the kind of the vibe you're sending off. It's like, hey, you are about to miss out on a really good opportunity if you don't pay attention.
So
I've been in,
yeah.
go on.
Yeah, well, so what that actually speaks to is that's a nice lead in for discussing a story arc or narrative arc. So
Yeah.
the whole thing you're fighting if you're presenting remotely, or if you're is somebody going to check an email or Slack or whatever while you're supposed to be paying attention to you. And the same thing in person, the phone with email, et cetera. That's very distracting. You're fighting that. And one of the best ways to fight that is by having a very interesting narrative arc. So you're actually telling a bit of a story. And Haya, you are a great journalist. You're well known. You probably live and breathe this stuff. You can explain it better than I am. Like, what is the narrative arc? What does that mean?
So I think the narrative arc really is the red thread that pulls it all together. Like if you've ever read like a short story anthology, right? There might be different authors, different everything, but they have an arc. They're all covering the same subject or the same time span or whatever it is that pulls these stories together. And even quite different stories can be pulled together in that way. If you read the SF Chronicle, the thing that pulls them together is that they're all stories relevant to San Francisco. The same thing is what you'll be doing for your startup. So you're figuring out, okay, in the story I'm telling here, what is the one thing that pulls all of this together? It makes all of this relevant. Now, there's many different storytelling elements you can use here, but one is examples. So find an example that really makes this story come to life. And then throughout your story, you can fall back to that example and really kind of, hey, remember I was talking about them? This is still relevant. Hey, remember I did this? It's still here. And some of the most intriguing pitches I've sat through are the ones that actually set that up on slide 1, where they talk about like, hey, just to kind of set the scene so we know what we're talking about here, imagine you are someone, right? And now you're actually talking about a user persona. If you have a product-based background, you understand how to do this, but that works for finances, that works for all sorts of things. So for 4P, the slide we had up earlier, we could say something like, imagine that you are Nancy. You're an experienced plumber, but you've just moved from California to Florida, right? You haven't got an established brand yet, and you're looking for a business, but you know your business, right? And so now you suddenly have a number of pieces to the puzzle here. You know that you're talking about experienced professionals. You know what the problem is here because everybody needs business. And without really saying much about your business, you've really set the stage for why your business needs to exist. You haven't really said anything about the business that, but you've mentioned something about the product. And then if you have a second example that if you do a marketplace type play, that explains the other problem. So if you are Uber, you can say, hey, your car is in the driveway most of the time, and sometimes you need to go places. You've explained two pieces of the marketplace dynamic without really going into depth. But those two pieces you can keep double clicking down on to really get a much deeper understanding of the kind of dynamics that are at play for your particular business.
So personas are pretty powerful. It doesn't mean you're explaining the personas, but you can use them as sort of like a common riff. So a thing that I definitely have seen many great journalists do is they're maybe writing a story about something big or macro, like a societal issue, but they start by the first couple of paragraphs are talking about an individual or a family that's experiencing that problem, and it kind of really personalizes what's going on. And then they zoom out to talk about the industry at whole or the problem at whole in mass. And so doing something similar in your pitch, particularly if you have live customers that you can use as examples, you can tie everything together. That can be really, really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a really good example of this is, you might remember a few years ago, Flint was having a water crisis, right? Around 12,000 children were exposed to lead in drinking water. Huge public health crisis. But it is very hard for humans to imagine 12,000 of anything. But if you go and talk to one parent who has a sick child, you can bet that you get a very powerful story out of it, because everybody can identify, at least emotionally, with what it would be like to have a sick child. And I think you can do that for your startup too. You don't have to invent sick children, but tell the story of one particular person, and then slightly later, when you're talking about market size or you're talking about go-to-market, you can say, "Hey, you remember I told you about Nancy? There's actually 3 million Nancys in the US. You remember I told you about Bob? There's 8 million Bobs in this country. We've identified them. We know how to reach them." And then you can actually play a little bit with that. And then further on later on, if you have some testimonials or something like that, you can go even further. It's like, hey, I told you about Bob. Bob is actually real. Here's Thomas. Thomas is telling us exactly what's going on here. And there's 5 more of him, that kind of thing. And so you can kind of play with that as a narrative device. The other thing that's worth thinking about when it comes to the red thread is how that ties all the different slides together. A lot of the time, you kind of see somebody run out of steam, they kind of run out of something to say, and then they just click to the next slide. And then the next slide goes, oh yeah, I'm talking about
Traction
operating
now.
plans or traction,
exactly,
right? It just doesn't feel professional. And that's how our brains work. But in a well-rehearsed pitch, you can actually set up your next slide before you hit go. So you could say, hey, I've talked about the operating plan. I've talked about all the things we need to do to build this company. Let me talk a little bit more about the team, because I think the team is extra important. Click, now there's a team slide, right? It was one little sentence, but that one little sentence pulls it together so beautifully, and it makes it look like you know what you're doing. And it doesn't take much rehearsing to get those little, they're called bridges, to get those bridges from slide to slide together, and just, that's the piece you rehearse, because it makes it seem so good when you know, it hits home so beautifully.
Exactly. Yeah. So I do like the idea of the narrative element, and there are many places that I've seen founders very successfully tie in example customers. It works great on the enterprise, particularly if you have like big logos. Investors love it when you have a big logo like a Coca-Cola or Procter and Gamble or Toyota. I don't know why I'm picking consumer brands, but you have one of those brands as a client. And then you can talk about, well, so I told you the average customer is paying us, $50,000 a month. Well, Coca-Cola is paying us $60,000 a month, but they're using these features, blah, blah, blah. And then when you come to like the traction side, you say, well, we have 5 companies, like including Coca-Cola, and then maybe some other ones you haven't heard. And then when you come to the sales and marketing side, you can say, well, as I mentioned, our sales and marketing is going to be focused around events. And we met Coca-Cola at XYZ event. We met 10 other companies there, 2 of which are still in the sales funnel. Like, that type of a thing can really make it clear that you know your business pretty well. And you might think that's only works when you have a few clients, but actually when you get more clients, it works maybe even better, because you're kind of proving that you as the founder are focused on individual successes and making sure your organization is driving client success. But then you have the big numbers that sit beside it to show that it's not a fluke, it's not a random thing. There's a lot of companies that are paying you to do that, or a lot of consumers paying you to do that.
Yeah. And again, this is where it's all storytelling, right? People watch any documentary, people connect so strongly with story. And VCs love to say that they invest just on the spreadsheets and just on the kind of on the facts, but that is just not true. They have to believe in you. And as a founder, you are a storyteller. You still tell stories all the time to your potential employees, to your potential customers. You are out there telling stories and driving that home and showing a VC that you're very good. Like you can string a good narrative together and you can convince somebody of something. The very best founders are fantastic at this.
That's right. For sure. You've got to convince people to join your company, so they may have a career, need to pay their rent, might have a family to support. You're going to convince them to leave their cushy job and come work for you, maybe for less money. You got to be able to tell a story to get that to happen, right? You're going to be able to bring investors on. You got to be able to tell a story. You're going to be able to sell to whoever your end client is. It's telling a story. So it's believe it or not, it's a crazy storytelling is a pretty important skill. Why don't we take a quick look at a couple of other examples that we like from around the internet? Now, I'm not going to say any of these are perfect, but all these companies that we're going to show have successfully raised money. And so let's talk about them really quickly here. So this one is from a company named Front. The CEO raised a Series A in 2016, and they were kind enough to put their slide deck online. I thought they did a nice job. So just to show you, what they do, all your company's external communications in one collaborative inbox. So this helps set the stage for a somewhat complicated enterprise product. Like you can at least begin to grasp what it is and who it's for. And so this will help. Certain VCs will say, no, thank you. I invest in consumer companies. This isn't what I want. And others will say, oh my gosh, I've been thinking about the future of work and communication. I want to meet with you. This is kind of right up my alley. Right. Yeah. And then another one would be Mattermark, which is a data company. And they're saying, organizing the world's business information. It's a little bit loose, I would say. It's maybe not super tight. However, that might be their slogan. I feel like they could probably have done a little bit better in terms of explaining what they were doing here. But this is probably, I would say, the bare minimum of what you need to do on the intro slide. Yep. I think if you are, if you have less information in this, like the intro slide is not doing you any favors. And so why, if you're going to have a 10 or 12 deck slide, have a slide that doesn't do you anything? Right.
Yeah. And as you're saying, right, don't waste it. Just your logo with your name. You know, this is the funny thing. You've been staring at this for so long, it's memorable to you,
Mhm.
but you know, it is not interesting to anybody else. And again, this one is actually a very similar part of the story, right? Beersub.com, it's an awful company, but Netflix for beer, an AI-powered beer subscription that learns your taste. Everybody knows how much time and effort Netflix put into their recommendation engine, because it was such an important thing back when you were getting shipped DVDs. And that actually got transferred really well to being able to browse streamable content. So it makes sense. I mean, you can argue with whether or not this makes sense as a business, but as a pitch, this makes sense. And it's saying launching 2.5 million. It's a very small fundraise. So you're talking about essentially a proof of concept. Well, that makes sense. It launches in 3 strategic markets.
Right.
So,
So
it's
yeah.
very tight.
Right. Yeah. And just to be clear, like when Haya is kind of making fun of this company doesn't exist. This is an example company that he made to put into his book.
Yep.
So you can get this template. We'll share a link with it. Again, this is a consumer focused business that you can get the template for. And so when we created these fake businesses for our pitch deck templates, we weren't trying to make them be real. We wanted them to be slightly silly because we didn't want you to focus on the business model. We want you to focus on the slides.
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So we're probably about 20 minutes into talking about the first slide. And so let's talk about some of the common issues here, right? So the name of your company is not enough. Don't miss an opportunity.
Yeah.
Also, I think the flip side is you don't want to spend 20 minutes just on the first slide. Like you're going to just be rambling. There's no arc. So, you know, the slide should set the stage and you should move on. And if you're going to do a story arc, this is a nice place to tee it up. It can't be a 5-minute story arc. It's got to be, 60 seconds. People don't just move, get done with the slide, set the table, move on.
Yeah.
Those are the most common issues I see with this slide.
100%. And on the narrative arc piece, like as a thought experiment, think about what it would be to tell part of the narrative on every slide. So you're talking about market size, you're talking about go-to-market, you're talking about team, you're talking about product, solution, problem, all the different parts of your story. Like, what would it be like to tell a small part of this narrative arc everywhere? Now, that's not how you would present it, because that gets real boring and really tedious very fast. But if you have that in your back of your mind, like when the back and forth is happening and you realize you haven't tapped into your story arc for a while, you can mention it. It's like, oh yeah, this makes sense here, this makes sense there. And again, when you're rehearsing this, and I've done this with hundreds of founders now, it feels incredibly corny, but it makes a huge difference for how tight the pitch feels overall. It's like you're just a friend who's telling a story, and it is incredible how much of a difference it makes.
Right. And if you want to practice that, the way to do is that on each slide, ask yourself, if it's the sales and marketing slide, how did Nancy hear about us?
Yep.
Right. If it's the industry slide, how does Nancy compare to the average plumber? Right. So just ask yourself those questions. And then to the extent that the venture capitalist dives in and wants to go deep on something, a very awesome way to get a venture capitalist to think you know what you're doing is to have an example of someone who's paying you money, who has done it the way that you say things are happening.
Yeah.
Right. It's hard to refute that person has paid me $50 a month for the past 4 months. Like that happened.
Yeah, cash in bank is definitely, and again, tapping into your narrative on the traction slide, super helpful, because it's an obvious place to do it. But also on the very last slide, we can talk about that in a different episode, but when you do your, hey, any questions or just a quick summary, you can actually wrap it up beautifully by saying, hey, let's help Bob and Nancy build the future of plumbing.
Yeah.
Are you ready? Grab your checkbook. Let's do this together.
Exactly.
It is a really cool way to just wrap it all up in a bow and go, okay, now the conversation really starts.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's summarize this here. So for the first slide, don't waste the opportunity. Set the table, make sure that it's at least plausible that someone who just glancing at the slide can understand what you do.
Yep.
Ideally, if you can fit it on there, how much money you're raising, if it's a Series A, Series B, seed, etc. And then just think about your story arc and get ready to give an example to support your story if it works for your pitch. So I think those are kind of the key takeaways for this slide.
Yeah, I love it. And I think the beautiful thing about the storytelling piece is that, you can use it as a crutch if the conversation is a little bit crunchy and you don't really get through to people. And if there's a really good free flowing back and forth, throw it away. You've accomplished what you need to do. You have a great back and forth. You have a great conversation going. Now you're building rapport, and the storytelling makes such a good crutch for that. If you have rapport, forget about it. Just focus on, how am I going to make you rich? Because this is going to be amazing. It works really well for VCs.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And please follow along at kruzeconsulting.com/pitch-deck to get the templates and to see us discuss what we think should go on to the rest of the slide deck. Thank you.